So my name is James McDonald, and I'm from Lions Consulting Group. If you're not familiar with Lions Consulting Group, we are a full-service digital agency. We do implementation, design, hosting, support, marketing, or if you don't know which of those levers to pull, we also have a strategy group that can tell you if and when to pull those levers. So within Lions, I lead analytics, and today I'm going to be talking about a subject that's very dear and near to my heart. I'm going to be talking about segmentation. So how we can segment our data to drive additional revenue through basic data sets. So there's three things I'm going to talk about. First, the data that you already have. And I'm going to make that applicable to everyone. I know there's going to be some folks in the crowd who probably have some very robust tagging setups that are collecting a crazy amount of data. I'm going to make this applicable to just the base implementation of an analytics pixel. So anything that I cover during this presentation is going to be a data points that you guys have available at hands currently. After I go over that data and what you guys have, I'm going to tell you how you can supercharge that by adding some traditional marketing techniques and supercharging that data with customer journey mapping. And then lastly, we'll go over some examples of how that works. So for starters, you have a ton of data. You have a ridiculous amount of data. And a lot of that data isn't going to be important. It's going to be noise. It's good to have collected and on hand for when you need it at some point in the future, but you don't need to go through every single entry in your guys' analytics platform. There's just this tiny sliver of data, and if you're on the far left, you might not even be able to see this tiny sliver of data here, but there's just a little bit that is the game-changing, diamond in the rough, actionable data that's going to change your business. The first part of that tiny sliver is going to be the what. So the primary KPIs that you look at through your analytics systems, hopefully you have it automated through some kind of dashboard or API where you're looking at these KPIs on a daily or weekly frequency and understanding what your conversion rate, AOV, session volume is, and how that's trending for whatever kind of time comparison makes sense for you. If that's month over month or year over year, if there's some kind of seasonality, that's going to be the what of your data. Where reporting gets elevated to analysis is when we start segmenting into that data and we understand not only what's happening, but why it's happening. And segmentation is going to be the best tool that you guys have in your toolbox to figure out that why. So at a high level, we might see that our conversion rate was at 2.95 and it dropped to 2.8. At that aggregate level, we're not going to be able to really understand why that conversion rate shifted. But when we start segmenting the data, we're going to start finding the indications of what's moving the needle, or in this case, dropping the needle. So maybe in this situation, this first column of teal dots equated to organic traffic. And the next column of our orange dots was email traffic. And lastly, we have affiliate traffic. That's not to say that because our middle column, that 4.5 conversion rate is already strong, that we should just ignore that. Because there might be some opportunities that exist for that email traffic, and maybe that's a little bit below threshold for where that conversion rate should be. One of the main things that's going to make this segmentation data valuable to you is when you start comparing it to benchmarks for whatever dimension that you're segmenting it by. So if you're looking at different traffic mediums, you're going to want to know how should organic be converting relative to CPC or affiliate. And that way, maybe you wouldn't focus on that first column, organic, that has the lowest conversion rate, because you might figure out that that 1.5 is really strong, and actually it's one of the two other areas. If that last column was in fact affiliate at 3.5, that would be a really low conversion rate for affiliate, and we likely would have some pretty large opportunities to optimize that specific channel. So there's a lot of different dimensions that we can segment data by that's collected in a base implementation, and this is just a handful of some of the big ones. We could look at device category, device medium, product selection method. So is somebody browsing through the site experience, or are they doing an internal search and finding products in that way? How familiar are they with the product line, and how can we figure that out by how they're pathing through the site experience? So we can look at any of these dimensions, and we can combine these different dimensions to make some pretty interesting groups. We could look at browser and see if people are still coming from Internet Explorer 7, or maybe if they're still on BlackBerry phones, to see if maybe we have a traffic segment from 2007 that's visiting our site. Lots of different ways that we can cut this data and really get some insights into how these different demographics and segments are using our experiences. The next way that we can cut our data is looking at the user experience by where visits get within our customer journey. So we have sessions, we have our entire population of sessions, and then we have our sessions who make it all the way to the product detail page, sessions that make it to checkout, and sessions that make it to transaction. Ideally, this would be sessions who add the cart and then initiate the cart process. But again, I just want to show you guys data that is already collected in your guys' analytics platforms. And this is data that, for the vast majority of you have access to, and you could create this behavior funnel. Before I actually go to the next slide, if there's one slide you take a picture of during this presentation, or take notes on, this is probably a good one, because this is an aggregate of a data set that I looked at as I was putting this presentation together. And so these drop-offs between these different phases are actually kind of a good starting point. Ideally, if you are in kind of an outlying industry, you'd have something that would be more specific to your brand. But if we're just looking at a high-level industry-agnostic behavior funnel and the drop-offs between these various steps, this is a pretty good one to get to about a 2.6 conversion rate. So, like I said, all that data is currently at your hands. You can segment to that level. To get those first dimension-level segments, that's pretty easy. All we have to do is say sessions that include visits who came from organic, and we just specify that condition that you're trying to segment. For the behavior funnel segments, it's a little bit more tricky, but just as easy. We just want to say sessions that were exposed to a specific page. So we'll say sessions page contains, and then maybe /checkout. The tricky part is sometimes isolating product detail exposure, because there's not going to be, in some cases, a unifying element between those pages. Sometimes we get lucky and all the product detail pages will have product ID in the URL, and it's really easy to pull those visits out and make that segment group. Other times we have to get a little bit more sophisticated with how we create the logic in that analytics platform. Maybe you have to say, within the URL, we need all pages that had 2 directory levels, and were not any of these pages that we know meet that logic but are not product detail pages. And then when we have both of those running in conjunction, we can start looking at our dimension segments and our behavior segments at the same time to get an understanding of how our different dimensions path down the behavior funnel. So in this case, we can see that for a desktop behavior funnel and a mobile behavior funnel, we have roughly the same amount of sessions getting to product exposure, the same amount of sessions getting to checkout exposure, but then we have a significant drop-off between these two dimension segments when we get from checkout to transaction. So if you have a roadmap where you know you need to improve your mobile experience and you have a list of things that maybe you've seen that competitors are doing, or you know that you just need to do for your mobile experience at some point, looking at this kind of behavior funnel at the device category level might help you prioritize those items in your roadmap and tell you that it's the checkout that you need to be focusing on right now, and the items in your roadmap that correlate to that should be elevated. The last layer that I'll add onto segmentation is when you're just looking at 2 different time periods to figure out maybe the impact of something that you changed on site. Ideally, that would be something that you would A/B test instead of just changing and looking for a lift or looking for a decline. But a lot of times changes are made quickly and we don't have that data, or you'll start engaging with the client or start working at a new brand and you'll have to reverse engineer your way into that. Using segmentation is a great way to get a cleaner read on that activity. So at a high level, you could just do what's that old time period versus that new time period, but that's not going to be very controlled. So you'll want to try to eliminate the noise by segmenting out visits that saw campaign activity, or maybe visits that came for support content, so we can get a cleaner segment and have a better control. And in this case, if we changed the navigation between these two time periods, if we got it to the point where product exposure and checkout exposure had roughly the same drop-offs because there wasn't any change in the experience there, and we could see in our two time periods that we essentially got apples to apples, I think that would be a pretty clean read that what we see happening between sessions and product exposure is reflective of the site changes that were made to the site. So that's kind of the initial primer on segmentation and the data that you guys have available. One of the key ways that we can use that data to kind of supercharge our activities and really look at what we should be doing to drive our experiences is correlating that to the customer journey. So that behavior funnel that we looked at earlier really does broadly align to awareness, consideration, intent, and result. With result, there could be various goals that we have. So maybe we have multiple conversion funnels because it might not just be a transaction that we're looking for. Maybe we want an email sign up or other success goals that are specific to your brand. There could be other things that you track there. So maybe more than one funnel, but at the high level, these are going to be the 4 areas that we look at. And for each of these areas, we have a different set of criteria that we could tackle to improve that area. So with awareness, one of the biggest things is going to be product findability. So maybe somebody landed on the site, but you see that big drop-off before they get to your product detail pages. So it's time to look at that navigation, your refinements, your internal search. You can start segmenting by visits who are exposed to those different elements and start figuring out which ones maybe not pulling their weight. Internal search should be really strong. It should be roughly 3 times stronger than your visits who are browsing your site, because those visits come to the site with strong purchase intent. They already know what they want, so if they're doing a search and they're not converting much higher than those visits who are browsing, you probably have a problem there. Consideration is kind of a beast of an area because there's so many different things that you can optimize in this area, but at a high level, it's going to be the strength of your products and your product content and the transparency that you create for your visits and understanding the value of that product. Intent is going to be one of the more simple but frustrating areas to improve, and that's going to be basically how do you reduce friction within the checkout process, and are there any kind of shortcuts you can give your visits so that they're more likely to convert. There's definitely some peripheral elements that you might be analyzing within that area. You might look at would subscription models or anything like that impact your cart. But at the basic level, those 2 criteria are going to be the main things that you're focusing on. And then result is something I'm not going to speak at length about because that's one of those areas that we would need more data to really optimize on. That wouldn't be through that basic tracking pixel that I'm kind of speaking to, that basic data. That would be something where you would need to push refund data or customer service data into your analytics platform so that you'd have a true read on maybe a specific channel is driving a lot of purchases, but a lot of those purchases are turning into refunds. And if you push that refund data into your analytics platform, you could segment into that and try to isolate what the cause of that was. So a few examples to show how some of the segmentation ideas can work in conjunction. This first one at the most simplest level, I think the most simple takeaway we would have here is we have too long of a funnel before somebody can get to a shoppable page. And this is something that we've seen for a lot of clients before we start working with them, what their current experiences look like. And this would be the worst case scenario where maybe we have sessions that land on some kind of homepage, go to a content category page, so a category page without thumbnails, just kind of a navigational category page. And then in some situations, we've had clients who have a very sophisticated product that requires product education. So then they have a product content page before they get to a shoppable product page. If that's a situation at hand, one of the biggest takeaways you could have is you just need more navigational shortcuts. If somebody lands on the homepage and has high conversion intent already, you don't want to force them to go through that educational path. You want to allow them the ability to go to those shoppable product pages immediately. Once you give them that alternative path, that gives us another data point that we can segment on. And we can look at visits who land on those broader pages and see, are they taking the long path and they need that educational content, they need to be persuaded to buy those products, or do they have strong purchase intent already when they land on the site and they're immediately going to the shoppable product pages? Another one that kind of goes into further detail about one of the funnels that we looked at earlier with our time period segments is looking at a pre-integration of some alternative checkouts for post-integration. And in this situation, maybe we would just look at organic new sessions, and because we got relatively same numbers in our earlier ends of the funnel, we have 48% of visits getting product exposure, 47 post, 13 and 12 pre and post for checkout exposure. I feel like we did get a pretty good apples to apples comparison. It's not as strong as an A/B test, but it's relatively controlled, and I think we could conclude pretty solidly that those additional checkout methods did boost our checkout exposure, and it wasn't some kind of campaign activity or peripheral variable that impacted that. And then the last thing that I'll speak to in my remaining 2 minutes is that sometimes when you start segmenting into this data, you'll find the general area of what the problem is, but you won't find the specific cause of the problem. So it's kind of like in bad cop dramas where they're able to triangulate the phone call to the building of the offender, but they don't know the specific room. And before you start kicking down doors, it's often a lot more easier to collect more data so you know the specific problem. So this would be something with product exposure. If you saw that significant of a drop-off between product exposure and checkout exposure or add to cart, that's one of those areas that since so many things can go wrong there, it could be your product content, your price of your product, maybe there's not enough reviews to give people an understanding of what your product is. You'd want to do more research to figure out why are people dropping off between these two phases before you start kicking down those doors and looking for problems. So in a nutshell, that is segmentation and how we can use segmentation to drive your activity and really figure out where there might be some opportunities. I've ran out of time, but I'm going to hang out in front of this room. So if you guys have any questions, please reach out to me and we can address them afterwards. Thank you.